For weeks, I had been counting down the days to finally see my girlfriend Lisa, who lived far away. I had planned to spend New Year's Eve together by making it extra special by surprising her with an unexpected visit. I spent hours researching flights and ultimately booked one for December 30th. As I boarded the plane, my heart was racing with excitement and anticipation. After a long journey, I finally arrived in Lisa's town on the evening of December 31st. As I walked through the streets, the sounds of laughter and fireworks filled my ear, adding to my excitement as I made my way to Lisa's doorstep. I couldn't wait to see her reaction when she saw me standing there. However, as I arrived at her house, I was surprised to find a lively party in full swing, with guests chatting, laughing, and dancing throughout the house. Despite my initial excitement, I soon realized that my girlfriend was nowhere to be found. I searched through the throngs of unfamiliar faces, hoping to catch a glimpse of Lisa, but my efforts were in vain. As I continued to search, the sounds of the party seemed to grow louder and more boisterous, making it even more difficult to focus on my search. As I was searching the different rooms in the house, I eventually made my way up to the first floor. Upon my arrival, I noticed that the entire floor appeared to be empty. It was just about to leave when I suddenly heard a strange moaning sound emanating from one of the adjacent rooms. My stomach sank as a feeling of dread washed over me, and I slowly approached to investigate further. As I peered inside the room, my heart sank even further, as I came to realize that my worst fears had been realized. In front of me, I saw my beloved girlfriend eloping with another man. The air in the room grew thick with tension as I stood there in shock, unable to fully process what I was seeing. Anger filled my heart by the betrayal of my girlfriend, whom I trusted the most. It was a moment that would stay with me forever, haunting me with the memory of what I had seen. I stomped inside and I grabbed the man by the back of the shirt and pulled him up. He was caught off guard, probably because he wasn't expecting anyone to arrive. I left my cheating girlfriend alone and flabbergasted while I decided to deal with the man first. What was even more shocking was when the man started asking me who I was while claiming my girlfriend to be his. He seemed to have no clue either that she was two-timing us, but by the time we realized that we had already bashed each other up, so she took advantage of the situation and fled. As soon as the man I caught with my girlfriend exited the room, I found myself standing there, dazed and unsure of what to do. My heart pounded furiously against my chest as a wave of betrayal washed over me. I stood there for a few minutes, trying to come up with a plan of action. Eventually, it dawned on me. I needed to confront her and question. I had to know the truth, no matter how painful it might be. My mind was filled with a burning rage as I frantically searched for my girlfriend, scanning every corner of the party. But she was nowhere to be found. It wasn't until I overheard one of my friends mention that she had seen my girlfriend heading up to the rooftop that I knew where to go. My heart pounding with anger, I stormed toward the rooftop, determined to confront her and get answers. I needed to know why she was playing with my heart like that. As I pushed open the door to the rooftop, my eyes fell upon her trembling figure. She looked so small and fragile, but I knew better now. She was a siren, luring me in with her innocent doe eyes. She was standing near the railing, and as I was walking closer, she warned me not to approach. My heart was already racing with fear as I demanded to know why she cheated on me. But she didn't reply, instead biting her lower lip as she tried to avoid my gaze. With a sudden burst of energy, I rapidly closed the distance between us, catching her off guard. She attempted to evade me, but in doing so, she lost her balance and tumbled off the railing. My instinct was to catch her and prevent the fall, but for an inexplicable moment, I hesitated before frantically reaching out to grasp her hands. But as fate would have it, my hesitation proved costly, as I was unable to catch her in time. Luckily, there were people around who rushed to her aid and called an ambulance. She was rushed to the emergency room in critical condition. I know I should have gone after her, but after what she did to me, I couldn't forgive her and act like I wasn't hurt. I wasn't hurt physically like her, and you can say I lacked humanity, and even if I did, I don't regret it. I don't know when she recovered, or even if she recovered from her fall. I don't know, perhaps she died. I never visited her in the hospital or contacted her after that day. Instead, I booked a hotel room and stayed the night there. The next day, I booked a flight home and deleted all traces of her from my life. It's a harsh reality, but sometimes we need to prioritize our own mental health and well-being. While it may seem selfish, it's important to remember that I can't pour from an empty cup. I may have to move on, but the memory of her actions will be stuck with me forever. Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so. As I bustled about the kitchen preparing for the Christmas party that my daughter Carol had insisted on having, her voice suddenly echoed through the hallway. "Dad, can I please invite Liam?" she asked, her tone hopeful. I paused in my work, my mind racing. I had forbidden any boys from attending the party, but I didn't want to disappoint Carol. However, there was also my little girl's safety in mind. "No," I replied firmly. "I told you no boys are allowed in this party." Carol peeked into the kitchen, her eyes pleading. "But Dad," she began, but I cut her off. "No buts," I said. "You promised. I'm working my ass off for this party, and now it's up to you to keep your end of the deal." Carol looked hurt and frustrated, but I didn't give her a chance to argue. "I need to focus on my preparations," I said, shushing her. As she walked away sulking, I couldn't help but wonder if I made the right decision. On the evening of the party, Carol's friends started arriving at 7 p.m. I asked my child to assist with serving the guests and attending to their needs. As the party was intended for the children, I believed that my presence wasn't necessary, so I informed Carol and my other children that I'd be retiring from my room for a nap. Before leaving, I made sure to instruct them to keep an eye on things and ensure that everything went smoothly while I was resting. It was important to me that everyone have a good time at the party, and I trusted my children to take care of any issues that may have arisen. I don't remember how long I was asleep. When I opened my eyes, there was an eerie silence that was permeating throughout the house. It was strange, because there was supposed to be a party going on. I got up from my bed and walked hurriedly to the living room, hoping to find some explanation for the silence. But to my horror, the living room was empty. There wasn't a single soul in sight. As a sense of dread started to form in my gut, I began to search throughout the house for any sign of life. I called out the names of my children, but there was no response. The silence was deafening, only to be broken by the sound of my pounding heart, and the emptiness of the house was suffocating. I couldn't even hear the sound of wind outside, which was weird, since it was supposed to be howling on this day of the month. I stepped outside only to be greeted by a blanket of snow and a biting cold that would have made me shiver if I had remembered to grab my jacket. But I was too worried to feel the cold. I looked around. The whole town was empty. The shops were open, but there was no one in sight. The Christmas decorations were still up, but there were no people around to enjoy them. My heart raced as I frantically searched for my kids, hoping that they were safe and sound. The fear that gripped me was overwhelming, and I couldn't shake it off. I wondered what could have happened to everyone and why they had abandoned the town. When hours passed, I was still standing alone outside my house, shivering with no success. I wanted to cry, but I knew even if I did, it would be no use. The sound of my heartbeat filled my ears as I tried to make sense of what was happening. It felt as if the world had come to a standstill, and everything around me was frozen in time. I felt a chill run down my spine. I wondered, is this some kind of nightmare? Or am I still asleep? With a lump of tears forming inside my throat, I once again began searching around town to find answers, to see if I could find them. To be honest, at that moment I was selfish. I didn't care if everyone else remained disappeared, as long as I could find my children. I called out their names again and again, but the only response I was met with was the sound echoing of my voice bouncing off the empty streets. I ran toward the park where they usually were, but it was also empty. The swings were still moving, but there was no one on them. I looked around, feeling helpless and scared. Where could they have gone? At this point, I broke down and fell to my knees. The sound of my sniffling echoed through the surroundings as I desperately wished for a miracle. As someone who didn't believe in God anymore, I prayed that if there was a God, He would help me. Exhausted and hopeless after hours of searching and crying, I trudged back home and decided to give the house one last look. I grasped the door handle, steeling myself for the disappointment that was sure to follow. But as I turned the handle, a sudden noise emanating from inside the house rekindled a flicker of hope in my heart. Hastily pushing open the door, I was greeted by an unexpected sight. My daughter was standing in the living room, animatedly chatting with a young man whom I recognized as someone she had sneakily invited over. Overwhelmed with emotion, I rushed forward and enveloped my daughter in a tight embrace, tears streaming down my face. "Dad, you're embarrassing me," she whispered, a mixture of amusement and exasperation in her voice. But I couldn't help but smile. As I pondered the events that had just unfolded, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd somehow slipped into a parallel dimension, perhaps the mirror world, where time and space work differently. Despite my confusion, I felt grateful that my desperate prayers had been answered. Everything had returned to normal, and my horror was over, while I prayed once more that it won't happen again.
So this happened all the way back in the late 1990s when I was a college sophomore. Me and the girl I was dating at the time had been going steady for about 8 months, and since she was my first real girlfriend, my mom was pretty keen to meet her. And what better time than the holidays to introduce her to the folks? During the week before Christmas, my mom's family traditionally held quite a large gathering up at my uncle's place over in Sandy, in my home state of Oregon. Pretty much all my extended family head out there year after year from all over the Portland area, and since they've gotten word that I was bringing my girlfriend, the hype to meet her was huge. I won't lie, I was kind of nervous that they'd embarrass me in front of her, but that anxiety was totally misplaced. She got along really well with all of them, and despite some playful humiliation when a cousin of mine told her the story of how I literally peed my pants at the Haunted Mansion ride when I was a kid, they were a credit to me. And when it came to driving her back home, she seemed to be more into me than ever. We'd agreed to drive back down to Eugene at like 7 p.m. so I wouldn't be too tired driving back. But since we had such a good time, we stayed way later than we had planned to, and didn't get on the road until about 10:30 p.m. that evening. In the hopes of making the journey a little faster, I ended up taking the OR211 instead of just sticking to the I-5S for the whole drive. Annoyingly, this didn't quite actually make the journey any faster, but point being, the OR211 was pretty much surrounded by farms or these huge swaths of dense pine forest. So as you can imagine, big stretches of it aren't lit very well at all, and for some parts of the drive, we were moving through complete darkness, saved only by our car's headlights. But honestly, I wasn't all worried about it. I was pretty good at reading a map, and once I was back on the I-5, a road I knew pretty well, I figured everything would be all good. So we're just cruising along, in high spirits, talking about how goofy some of my family were, but generally my girlfriend was singing their praises and telling how she couldn't wait to meet them again. It's right around then that we hit a section of the highway that descends down this big old hill, heading up to the bridge crossing over Deep Creek. There, the highway is sandwiched by some of the densest forests you've ever likely seen, and there is absolutely nothing lighting up the highway. It's the only thing we can see from the front seats of the cars, like maybe 20 or 30 feet that our headlights are illuminating, and pretty much nothing else. But like I said, we're in high spirits, completely unprepared for what was about to happen. Right as the highway was starting to level off, something darts across the front of us so fast and so suddenly that I barely missed smashing into it. I brake so hard that I almost gave the pair of us whiplash. Then, when we're stopped, both me and my girlfriend are in a complete frenzy of, "Oh God, did you see that? What was that?" There are plenty of deer in that area of Oregon, plenty of coyotes too. But the thing that ran out in front of us was way too big to be a coyote, and something about the way it moved gave me this gut feeling that it wasn't a deer either. The shape was just way too slender, almost like whatever was out there had moved on 2 legs, not 4. Now next thing, I know how completely dumb this sounds in retrospect, but my curiosity just got the better of me and I decided I wanted to investigate. So again, this was also incredibly dumb. I turned the car like 90 degrees in the highway so I could point our headlights into the woods. Yes, this could have caused a horrible accident if another car had come along at the same time I was doing this, but I don't think I was thinking straight at the time. You see, as a kid growing up in the Pacific Northwest, I've heard a lot of stories about Bigfoot and Sasquatch, and I'd be lying if I said that they didn't capture my imagination. No, I'm not saying that I thought I'd caught a glimpse of Gigantopithecus or anything. I know the stories are mostly exactly that, just stories, but a part of me just wanted to be sure. So like I said, I turned the car 90 degrees, turned on the high beams, and stepped out of the driver's side and onto the highway. I stare off into the trees for a minute or two, but I don't see a thing. Nothing is moving out there, and the whole scene was as quiet as the grave. But as I'm looking, I get this feeling in the pit of my stomach, and start to feel as if though I'd made a huge error of judgment. It was one of the most intensely terrifying feelings I'd ever felt in my entire life, a feeling like I was being watched by something predatory. I know it's a huge cliche, and the whole I felt like I was being watched thing is such a tired old trope, but I don't really know any other way to phrase it. My heart was pounding. The hairs on the back of my neck are standing on end, and my gut just turned to ice. So without turning my back to the woods, where I expected the danger to come from, I started edging back towards the car. Then suddenly, out of nowhere, I practically jump out of my skin when I hear the car's horn letting off one long, excruciatingly loud, extended blast. I mean, it scared me so bad that I almost straight up peed my pants, Haunted Mansion style. My first thought was that my girlfriend had ended up leaning on the horn as she climbed over into the driver's seat for some reason, because she'd done that once or twice before. But as I turn back around, I can see she's still on the passenger side, but that she's actually leaning over to push the horn in what was evidently a frenzied attempt to get my attention. I run back to the car and ask her if she's okay, but she doesn't say a single word to me. She just points off to a spot about 50 feet away from where we parked. I spin my head around to see what she's pointing at, and that's when I see it. What was, without a shadow of a doubt, the thing that had run in front of our car just a few minutes prior. Lit up by the residual light of our high beams, what I saw was really obviously a man, but he was covered in animal furs. What looked like a mishmash of deer skins, bear skins, and elk skins, and on his head, secured in a way I'm not even sure of, were these antlers. At the time, because of how closely it was to the holidays, I remember the words "reindeer man" just flashed into my mind. Maybe in the naive hope that the dude was dressed that way out of some misdirected festive spirit. But he certainly didn't seem in any kind of festive spirit, not in the least bit. Like I couldn't see his eyes because of the weird kind of head covering he had on, but I could see his mouth, and at first he kind of looked like he was giving us a smile. Only as I looked, I could see it wasn't a smile at all. This guy was just baring his teeth to us, like the way chimps do as some kind of warning. After that, he turned and walked off into the forest, never to be seen again. Obviously, right after that, me and my girlfriend just got out of there and got back onto the roads towards the I-5. It took us both a while to calm our nerves, but my girlfriend was particularly shaken up, and that's because she'd seen something that I hadn't. And as we drove on, she explained exactly what that was. While I'd been staring off into the woods looking for Sasquatch or whatever, she'd noticed him out of her peripheral vision, but was basically frozen in fear for a moment or two as she watched him walking slowly towards me. Or rather, walking isn't the right word. From how she described it, this guy was stalking, the way a hunter might stalk a deer. The way she puts it, she had to summon up pretty much all of her courage to be able to lean over and honk the horn the way she did. Then when Reindeer Man had heard the honking, he backed off a little before I saw him, and like I said, he kind of just froze in place before disappearing. I did a fair amount of online research when I got home to try and find out if anyone else had any run-ins with this guy, but there was absolutely nothing online about him. There are plenty of crazy survivalist types up here in the Pacific Northwest, and I'm guessing he was one of those, but they tend to be pretty open about their existence, sometimes even advertise themselves as militiamen or whatever, whereas the Reindeer Man seemed like he was living completely off the grid. I don't live in Oregon anymore. Me and my girlfriend during the encounter broke up at the end of college, but when we were still together and I happened to be driving down towards Eugene, I always avoided the stretch of highway that I saw the Reindeer Man on. I've told this story a lot over the years, and some people honestly just think I'm making it up as like a campfire tale or something. But it's not a tale, it's not made up, and it's definitely not just intended to be some dumb spoopy story. It's most definitely a warning to anyone traveling on that road at night, because if my girlfriend wasn't with me when he ran out in front of the car, if she wasn't there to spot him before he crept up on me, only to scare him off with a blast of the horn, I honestly might not be here to warn you guys. So please, this holiday season, drive careful, drive slow, and do not stop for any reason on dark, deserted stretches of forest highway. My family loves Christmas. We're some of the most annoying people that start putting up the Christmas decorations in mid-November, and playing Mariah Carey's All I Want for Christmas Is You for the first time every year has become a bit of a ritual. My husband and my 3 daughters always wear their matching pajamas, which I love, and although cooking Christmas dinner can be a bit stressful some years, I just adore being that family that all the relatives flock to when the festive season comes around. There's only one big problem. We're Australian. Time for a quick explanation. In America and Europe, Christmas takes place during the winter, obviously, but the months surrounding December are some of the hottest in the Aussie calendar. Down under, you are more likely to be sunbathing with your Santa hat on than sipping warm eggnog by a log fire. But just like everywhere else, pretty much all of our festive imagery consists of snow-covered winter wonderlands, fields caked in snow, and little robins red-breasted nestled in the bough of a pine tree. But where we live, in a place called Darwin, it's a lot more palm tree than pine tree. Like my 2 kids have never even seen snow, and in 2019, we wanted to change that. So even though people called us crazy for doing it, we booked flights over to a freezing cold Europe in late November. The whole trip was absolutely amazing. I found the flights to be a bit of a pain, but seeing some of Europe's most incredible sights given a festive twist by a dusting of snow was worth every minute of being stuck in that cramped demon tube. We saw Prague, Berlin, Rome, Copenhagen, Paris, and London. But what my family seemed to be looking forward to the most was seeing Ireland for the first time. The kids seemed to have it in their heads that it was some magical place full of fairies and such, and could barely contain their excitement, while the prospect of drinking Guinness straight from the tap had my husband almost as giddy as our 2 little girls. We arrived at this little Airbnb out in the suburbs of Cork, a semi-detached rental that looked like something out of a storybook, and before anyone even puts their bags down, they're clamoring for the Wi-Fi password. Now, my husband works in IT, and internet safety is something of a passion of his. Not just because it's his occupation, but because he knows to help keep our daughters safe from some of the darker things that are out there in cyberspace. You'd have to ask him for all the details regarding the thing he does, but whenever we arrived at an Airbnb somewhere, my husband would like to scan the network to make sure it had parental locks and was otherwise secure. So, he's tapping away on his laptop as I'm having a quick cup of coffee when I notice this particular look on his face. One I'd come to recognize as meaning, I don't like this at all. I take a seat next to him on the couch, leaning over to take a look at what's bothering him. all I can see is computer nonsense on the screen. I've never been very tech savvy, so much to my chagrin, I have to ask him to explain to me. He points to this line of text and explains that it told him that there was already a device connected to the Wi-Fi network when we arrived. He shows how he could account for all our phones and his laptop being connected, but there was one mystery device somewhere. Then he opens up another window and points towards a little icon, one that was clearly a little picture of a camera. Me being me, I try and see the positive side, suggesting that it's a security camera installed on the exterior of the property, but my husband does a lap of the building and says he couldn't see any kind of device anywhere. It's at that point that he starts trying to work some of his IT magic, and a few minutes later, I hear him calling me back into the kitchen in one of those dad voices like something is wrong, but I can't tip off the kids. His eyes are all wide as he points towards his laptop screen again, and on it is a video feed of the bedroom our girls were planning on staying in, like a top-down view, as if the camera were on the ceiling. We just go running up to the girls' room to find that the camera had been hidden inside a smoke detector that was directly over one of the beds. We still don't quite know who, but someone had been planning on watching our daughter sleep, which is just about one of the creepiest things that's ever happened to me and the family. My husband calls over the owner of the property right away to ask him why there was a camera installed in one of the kids' bedrooms. At first, the owner denied having CCTV on the property in the first place, and had the nerve to suggest that the video feed was coming from another property in the area, as if I wouldn't recognize my own bloody children. My husband had to actually threaten to send them a screenshot of the video feed to get them to admit it, and then they came out with a load of garbage about simply wanting to protect their assets. My husband then accused the person of being a voyeur and that he'd be reporting them to Airbnb, at which point they got all tongue-tied and couldn't think of anything to say. And then they just hung up. We called them out on being a creep, and they didn't have a word to say in their own defense. We were absolutely furious and thoroughly creeped out, having only narrowly avoided having that absolute dog staring at our kids all night. And even though it was quite late in the evening at that point, me and my husband got the kids to pack their things while we looked for a hotel nearby. It took us a good few months of emailing back and forth with Airbnb's customer complaints department, but we eventually got the refund we were most definitely entitled to. Airbnb also reassured us that they'd banned the homeowner from renting properties using the service, which did far more for my peace of mind than any amount of cash would have. I know there are people out there with those kinds of twisted desires and stuff, but never for a second did I ever think I'd run into one myself, let alone on our dream Christmas vacation over to Europe. The only thing that really worries me now is Airbnb's ability to keep this person and people like him off their platform altogether. My husband and I have pressed them on the systems they have in place to ensure their customers' safety, but they simply don't have any satisfactory answers. We made the point that this horrible voyeur could easily set up an account in the name of a friend or relative and simply continue recording people's kids against their knowledge, and the legalese email we received in response basically said, "We have no idea what to do about it." And that's the fear I'm left with. That somewhere out there is a little girl, lying peacefully in her bed, who has no idea that some Irish creep is watching them, doing God knows what while he does so.